Have you ever looked at a company's balance sheet and just had this feeling that you're not seeing the whole picture? Well, there's often this one little detail buried in the contracts that can totally flip what a company actually owns and owes. It's all about something called substitution rights. And honestly, getting your head around this is the key to seeing what's really going on. So let's dig in.
All right, so here's the plan for this explainer. First, we're going to nail down what a lease really is. Then, we'll get into this fascinating clash between what a contract says and what happens in the real world. After that, we'll jump into 3 real-world scenarios to see how this plays out. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a super simple test to clear up any confusion and talk about why this is so critical for a company's financial health. Okay, so first up, what even is a lease? And don't worry, you can forget all the complicated legal jargon for a second. This whole thing really boils down to one simple but really powerful word.
And that one little word, it's control. You see, the big accounting standards like IFRS 16 and IND AS 116, they're super clear on this. A contract is only a lease if the person using the asset has the right to control it. It's a simple equation: no control, no lease. Easy, right? Well, maybe not so fast.
So that leads us to a pretty straightforward rule of thumb. If the supplier can just swap out the asset whenever they feel like it, then you don't really have control, do you? And as we just said, no control means it's not a lease. Seems black and white. But this is exactly where things start to get interesting. And that brings us right to our second section, the problem of contract versus reality. Because this is where that simple black and white rule we just talked about starts to get, well, really messy. What's written down on a piece of paper and what can actually happen in the real world, yeah, they can be 2 completely different things.
Yeah, simple, right? Actually, not in real sense. This quote really hits the nail on the head. A contract might have a clause that says the supplier can swap an asset, but does that mean they actually will or even can? This is where we have to start peeling back the layers. And this really lays out the core battle, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got the legal jargon, the words in the contract saying, yep, we can replace this asset, but on the other hand, you've got the logistical nightmare, the cold, hard reality that makes swapping that thing practically and financially impossible. So the big question is, which one wins out? Okay, to figure that out, let's jump into our third section and play detective for a bit. We're going to open up 3 different case files, and each one is going to show us a different piece of the puzzle. So first up is case file number 1, the Precision CNC machine. We're talking about a manufacturing company that's leasing this incredibly specialized machine. And look, this is not just some tool off the shelf. This is a multi-million-dollar beast custom programmed to make, say, aerospace parts with microscopic precision. Now, the contract, it says the supplier can swap this machine out. But let's look at the reality of the situation. To replace this thing would mean weeks of downtime, insane recalibration costs. It'd be a total financial disaster for the supplier. That right to substitute, it's just words on paper. It's fiction. The user is the one with the real control here. So, the verdict? It is a lease.
All right, now let's flip the script completely. Let's open up case file number 2. This time we're looking at a big national logistics company, and they're leasing a whole fleet of delivery trucks. Now this is a whole different ballgame. The logistics company, they just need a truck. They don't care if it's truck 101 or truck 205 as long as it works. And for the supplier, swapping these trucks around is not only easy, it's actually a benefit. It lets them optimize their whole fleet. So that substitution right is very real and has actual value. This isn't about controlling one specific truck, it's about getting a delivery service. So the verdict here? It is not a lease.
Okay, and now for our third and honestly our trickiest case. We've got a company using these high-security data servers, right? They're housed in some third-party data center. And, you guessed it, the contract says the supplier can swap the servers, but can they? Do they? How would you even know?
This is where things get really murky, because there's just no way to know. There's no transparency. You can't just pop in and check if your data is on server A or server B. So what's the rule when you just can't tell? Well, the accounting standards have a pretty smart solution. If you can't verify that a substitution is actually happening, you have to assume it isn't. So let's put all 3 cases side by side. The CNC machine, not practical to swap, no benefit for the supplier. That's a yes for it being a lease. The delivery trucks, absolutely practical to swap, and the supplier benefits. So that's a no, it's not a lease. And the data servers, since it's totally unverifiable, we have to assume the right doesn't exist in practice, which means, yep, it's a lease.
Okay, so looking at all these cases, it all brings us to the main event here in Section 4. It's called the substantive right test. Think of this as the ultimate tool, a simple two-question test that lets you cut right through all the noise and legal jargon to find the truth.
And here it is. It's so simple. For a substitution right to be substantive, meaning for it to be real, it has to pass two checks. First, practical ability. Can the supplier actually do the swap without it being a huge mess or costing a fortune? Second, economic benefit. Do they actually gain something financially by doing it? If the answer is yes to both of those questions, then it's a real right and you do not have a lease. But if the answer to either one of those is no, then that contract clause is just legal fiction, and you've got a lease on your hands.
Which brings us to our final section, from fiction to fact. Because, at the end of the day, you might be asking, so what? Why do we even care about this? Why is this whole distinction so incredibly important? Well, here's why. A company's balance sheet is supposed to reflect economic reality, not some legal fiction. It needs to tell the true story of the business. And this whole test we've been talking about, it's the gatekeeper that makes sure what shows up on the balance sheet is what's actually happening, not just what's written in some cleverly worded contract.
And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. This isn't just some dusty accounting rule, right? It's really about truth and transparency and how a business represents itself. So the next time you're looking at a balance sheet, just ask yourself this. Am I looking at reality, or am I just reading a really well-written piece of fiction?